What's up, everyone, and welcome to this week's Cybersecurity Weekly, where we review the security events that happened in the last week.
Oh, drat these computers. They're so naughty and so complex. I could pinch them.
We start off with a story about malware and how it fools you. Massive analysis of 311 million malware warnings, and here's how hackers fool us. Malware is a massive issue for internet users across the world, and one of the main ways that we're hoodwinked is by clicking on something we're not meant to. Of course, the way that happens is by directing us to URLs. URLs are central to a myriad of cybersecurity threats, from phishing to the distribution of malware, say the authors of a new paper that tries to uncover and characterize what makes a maliciously used URL. Researchers at Australia's Commonwealth Science and Industrial Research Organisation, or CSI Australia, they researched and analysed 311 million records containing 77 million URLs that were submitted to Hispasec Sistema's online antivirus checking website VirusTotal between December 2019 and January 2020. The findings were astounding for the scale of the malware issue discovered. From the dataset the researchers analyzed, a staggering 2.6 million suspicious campaigns were identified based on their attached metadata, 77,810 of which were confirmed to be malicious through a secondary check. In total, 38.1 million records and 9.9 million URLs were found within those 2.6 million malicious campaigns. Perhaps most concerning for those trying to spot these malicious campaigns is the volume of worrying ones that slip through the net. Some surprising findings were observed, such as detecting rates falling to just 13.27% for campaigns that employ more than 100 unique URLs, the researchers say. A quarter of all submissions came from the United States, with 17 million unique pieces of content analyzed. Submitted URLs were checked by a median of 72 security vendors to determine if they're benign or malicious. But what was worrying was that almost all, 98% of all the submissions, were only flagged as malicious by 10 or fewer vendors at a time. This indicates that vendor detection performance is highly skewed and only a few of them are effective, the researchers wrote. That may seem a major concern, and it is, given the ineffectiveness of much of the market, but the wisdom of crowds does help spot those malicious sources. The researchers' findings are that if a URL is flagged by at least 4 vendors, it is reasonable to conclude that it is malicious. That means that while any individual security vendor solution may not be that reliable, the market as a whole is able to provide a safety net through strength in numbers. Still, malware detection is a cat-and-mouse game, and the hackers and cybercriminals behind these campaigns know how to try and force their way through defenses, and they literally do. The vast majority of malicious URLs come from campaigns that employ multiple unique URLs, according to the researchers. The goal is to bamboozle users into thinking they're visiting a legitimate URL, when in fact it's a fraudulent one. Those campaigns often try to mimic big brands to capitalize on the trust that those brands have built up over time. Take, for instance, one campaign launched by hackers. The one campaign of 4,081 unique URLs tried to pass off as an Apple brand. It used a combination of 9 subdomains, 12 domains, and 7 suffixes, ranging from www.apple.com as a subdomain, iCloud-com as a domain, and .us, .live, and .support as a GTLD. We see the efforts cybercriminals go to in order to evade defenses with our findings on their use of widely variant URL lengths and propensity for longer URLs, say the researchers. It is hoped that such insights would be of use to the wider cybersecurity community. We move on to phishing. Microsoft uncovered a large-scale, well-organized, and sophisticated phishing-as-a-service operation. Now, you may recall this story from one of my dailies. If not, I highly suggest you watch it for more in-depth analysis on this particular case. The turnkey platform allows users to customize campaigns and develop their own phishing ploys so they can then use the FAS platform to help with phishing kits, email templates, and hosting services needed to launch attacks. This investigation led them down a rabbit hole as they unearthed one of the operations that enabled the campaign, researchers wrote. With more than 100 available phishing templates that mimic known brands and services, including Microsoft itself, the bulletproof link operation is responsible for many of the phishing campaigns that impact enterprises today. Phishing is a common way for cybercriminals to dupe people through socially engineered emails into giving up their credentials to online accounts that can store sensitive data. Phishers use these emails, which sometimes fool people by impersonating a trusted company or an application or an institution, to direct people to specially crafted phishing sites so they can enter credentials thinking they are doing so for a legitimate reason. Phishing is often a gateway drug into other criminal activity. Phishers sell credentials obtained through campaigns on the dark web, and they can be used by ransomware gangs as an entry point into networks to deliver ransomware attacks, among other nefarious activities. Now, if you have not watched my full episode on phishing, I highly recommend that. The link is above. In that episode, I go through all the most common variations of phishing, including spear phishing, whaling, vishing, and more. I also pinned it in the link in the comment section below, and it'll be at the end credits of this video. So make sure you check it out after this weekly. Bulletproof Link is also known as Bulletproof Proft Link and Anthrax by its operators in various websites, ads, and other promotional materials, provides a starting point for people without significant resources to get into the phishing business. Phishing is one of the main entry points into getting involved with ransomware or getting your company attacked with ransomware. It's how they get a foothold into your system or into your network. So I highly recommend watching my full episode, reading up as much as possible on the topic of phishing, how to notice it, and how to educate yourself, your family, and your company and employees. We move on to REMCOS and Agent Tesla being loaded into memory with Rezero Loader. An Italian government email has been targeted by a phishing campaign. The attacker's goal aimed to install some remote control and information stealing tools. During the last month, Telsey encountered a new phishing campaign with banking and payment lure targeting email of Italian government, .startup.it, and companies of some industries. The threat actor's goal was to install REMCOS, a remote control tool, and Agent Tesla, information stealing trojan, on the victim's computers. The attackers initially sent fake emails that appeared to be from several legitimate companies, or in some cases from emails compromised. Moreover, some binaries were hosted on compromised websites. So again, another phishing attack in Europe, specifically right now being done in Italy, to try to install the REMCOS remote control tool or the Agent Tesla information stealing trojan. We move on to patches. Google has released Chrome 94.04606.61 for Windows, Mac, and Linux that addresses a high-severity zero-day vulnerability, CVE 2021-3793973, exploited in the wild. An attacker can exploit this flaw to execute arbitrary code on systems running vulnerable Chrome versions. This vulnerability is the 11th zero-day fix this year. This emergency update was rolled out to the stable desktop channel. It will be available to all users over the next few days. The vulnerability is a use after free in portals. It was reported by Clemente Lecene from Google Tag, who worked with Sergey Gladzunov and Mark Brand from Google Project Zero. Google confirmed that it is aware of the availability of an exploit for CVE 2021-37973, but the IT giant did not reveal it if it is aware of attacks in the wild exploiting this issue. Apple has released security updates to address 3 zero-day vulnerabilities exploited in attacks in the wild to compromise iPhones and Macs running vulnerable iOS and macOS versions. Apple confirmed that at least one of the flaws was exploited by threat actors to infect the device with the NSO Pegasus spyware. The list of impacted devices includes iPhone 5S, iPhone 6, iPhone 6 Plus, iPad Air, iPad Mini 2, iPad Mini 3, and iPod Touch running OS 12.5.5, and Macs with security update 2021-006 Catalina. The flaw tracked as CVE 2021-30860 is an integer overflow in the core graphics framework that could lead to arbitrary code execution by processing a maliciously crafted PDF. The flaw was reported by researchers from Citizen Lab. The other zero-day flaws addressed by Apple are a use after free issue in the WebKit tracked as CVE 2021-30858 and a type confusion issue in XNU operating system kernel tracked as CVE 2021-30869. Sonic has addressed a critical security vulnerability tracked as CVE 2021-20034 that impacts several secure mobile access, or SMA 100 series products. The vulnerability is an improper access control vulnerability that can be exploited by a remote, unauthenticated attacker to gain admin access on targeted devices. An improper access control vulnerability in SMA 100 allows a remote authenticated attacker to bypass the path traversal checks and delete an arbitrary file, potentially resulting in a reboot to factory default settings, reads the advisory published by SonicWall. SonicWall urges organizations using SMA 100 series appliances to immediately install the latest firmware versions that addresses the above vulnerability. Cisco has addressed 3 critical vulnerabilities impacting its iOS XE operating system, powering multiple products, including routers and wireless routers. The most severe of these vulnerabilities, a remote code execution vulnerability tracked as CVE 2021-34770 in the control and provisioning of wireless access points. Protocol processing of Cisco iOS XE software for Cisco Catalyst 9000 family wireless controller. The flaw is due to a logic error that occurs during the validation of CAPWAP packets. A remote unauthenticated attacker can trigger the flaw by sending a specially crafted CAPWAP packet to a vulnerable device. Successful exploitation of the issue could allow the attacker to execute arbitrary code with administrative privileges or cause the device to crash and reload. Another critical severity vulnerability addressed by the IT giant is a buffer overflow issue tracked as CVE 2021-34727 in the vDaemon process in Cisco iOS XE SD-WAN software. The flaw is due to insufficient bounds checking and has been rated with a CVS score of 9.8 out of 10. A remote unauthenticated attacker can exploit this flaw by sending modified traffic to a vulnerable target device. Successful exploitation could lead to executing arbitrary commands with the highest privileges or trigger a denial of service condition. We move on to attacks and vulnerabilities and updates. An unknown researcher publicly released on GitHub proof-of-concept exploits code for 3 iOS zero-day vulnerabilities and 1 flaw addressed by Apple in July. The expert discovered the 4 zero-day issues between March 10th and May 4th and reported them to the IT giant like a good boy. According to the researcher, Apple addressed one of the issues in July without crediting him, like a bad boy, while the remaining flaws are yet to be patched like a really, really bad boy. The expert attempted to contact Apple for clarification, but the remaining flaws were not addressed. Designed to exploit gamed zero-day and harvest-sensitive user information, works on iOS 15.0, which is the latest version of the Apple iOS operating system. The researcher explained that the Analytics D, which was addressed in iOS 14.7, could allow any user-installed app to access analytics logs that contain a huge trove of information, including medical information, heart rate count of detected atrial fibrillation and irregular heart rhythm events, menstrual cycle length, biological sex and age, whether user is logging sexual activity, cervical mucus quality, etc., device usage information like device pickups in different contexts, push notifications, count and users' actions, etc., screen time information and session count for all applications with the respective bundle IDs, information about device accessories with their manufacturer, model, firmware, version, and user-assigned names, application crashes with bundle IDs and exception codes, languages of web pages that the user viewed in Safari. A collection containing data about more than 700 million users believed to have been scraped from LinkedIn was leaked online this week after hackers previously tried to sell it earlier this year in June. The collection, obtained by the record from a source, is currently being shared in private Telegram channels in the form of a torrent file containing approximately 187 gigabytes of archived data. The record analyzed files from this collection and found the data to be authentic, with data points such as LinkedIn profile names, LinkedIn ID, LinkedIn profile URL, location information, town, city, and country, and email addresses. While the vast majority of the data points contained in the leak are already public information and pose no threat to LinkedIn users outside of maybe phishing, the leak also contains email addresses that are not normally viewable to the public on the official LinkedIn site. Security researchers from Guardicore discovered a flaw in the Microsoft Exchange Autodiscover feature that can be exploited to harvest Windows domain and app credentials from users worldwide. The Microsoft Autodiscover protocol feature of Exchange email servers provides an easy way for users' clients' application to configure themselves with minimal user input. According to Microsoft, most users know their email address and password, and with those two pieces of information, you can retrieve all the other details you need to get up and running. Email clients typically query multiple predetermined URLs derived from the user's email address domain to automatically configure themselves. According to Guardicore, the issue is due to the following issues: the back-off algorithm and the poor implementation of the above protocol in some applications. The experts discovered that the auto discovery mechanism used a back-off procedure in case it doesn't find the Exchange server's auto discover endpoint. Autodiscover works as follows. The client parses the email address supplied by the users, like emit@example.com. The client then tries to build a autodiscover URL based on the email address with the following format: https autodiscover.example.com/autodiscover/autodiscover.xml, and then the other three versions. When none of these URLs are responding, the autodiscover will start its back-off procedure. This back-off mechanism is the culprit of this leak because it is always trying to resolve the autodiscover portion of the domain, and it will always try to fail up, so to speak. Meaning, the result of the next attempt to build an autodiscover URL would be autodiscover.com/autodiscover/autodiscover.xml. This means that whoever owns autodiscover.com will receive all of the requests that can't reach the original domain. Amit Sherper, AVP of Security Research, North America, Guardicore registered the following autodiscover-based domains in an attempt, or a number of domains, in an attempt to see if they were contacted by clients. Between April 16th, 2021 and August 25th, 2021, the servers set up by the security firm received hundreds of requests, complete with thousands of credentials. The experts have captured a total of 372,072 Windows domain credentials and 96,671 unique credentials from various applications such as Microsoft Outlook. Experts were able to find credentials from various companies across multiple verticals, including fashion and jewelry, food manufacturers, investment banks, and power plants. GSS customer care and call center provider has suffered a ransomware attack that crippled its system and paralyzed call centers serving its Spanish-speaking customers. GSS is the Spanish and Latin American division of Hikvision, a European giant of customer care and call center providers. The company provides call centers and automated customer support phone services for organizations and businesses in Spain and Latin America, according to the record. Some of the impacted companies are Vodafone Spain, Madrid's water supply company, and television stations. The attack took place on Saturday, September 18th. The company notified the affected customers and told them that it is currently using Google-based systems as a backup infrastructure. None of the applications will be working until the incident is resolved, the company said at the time. The Hikvision spokesperson told the record that the attack was orchestrated by the Conti ransomware gang. It said it has no evidence that the ransomware operators have stolen customer data after the attack. Researchers warn that immediately after the release of the exploit code for the recently addressed CVE 2021-22005 flaw in VMware vCenter, threat actors started using it. The CVE 2021-22005 issue is a critical arbitrary file upload vulnerability that impacts appliances running default vCenter Server 6.7 and 7.0 deployments. vCenter Server is the centralized management utility for VMware and is used to manage virtual machines, multiple ESXi hosts, and all dependent components from a single centralized location. The vulnerability is due to the way it handles session tokens. The threat intelligence firm Bad Packets reported that scanning activity for this vulnerability started immediately after virtualization giant addressed the flaw. Researchers from Bleeping Computer also reported that threat actors have started to exploit CVE 2021-22021-22005 using code released by security researcher Jang. VMware confirmed it is aware of threat actors exploiting the flaw in the wild. Apache OpenOffice is currently vulnerable to a remote code execution vulnerability, and while the app's source code has been patched, the fix has only been made available as beta software, and they are awaiting an official release. That means that most people running the OpenOffice software suite, Open Source Office Suite, which has been downloaded hundreds of millions of times and was last updated in May, probably have vulnerable versions of software on their computers. On Saturday, September 18th, security researcher Eugene Lim revealed details about the vulnerability CVE 2021-33035 at HackerOne's Hacktivity online conference after an August 30th public disclosure date came and went without the fix being fully deployed. Lim found the flaw after examining the .dbf file format, which first appeared as part of the DBase 2 application in 1983, and setting up a template to fuzz the format, inject data into the stack in the hope of causing a crash. Lim, in his post, said that he wondered why this hadn't been caught, and he noticed that GitHub's LGTM automated security scan for open source projects had Apache OpenOffice tagged for Python and JavaScript, but not C++. Browsing the files on LGTM, he noticed that there were no C++ files included, he observed. This demonstrates the importance of sanity checking automatic static analysis tools. If your tools don't know the code exists, you can't find those vulnerabilities. Lim said the vulnerability also affects Scalabium DBase Viewer, CVE 2021-35297, and because that project was run by a single developer, the fix was quick. With Apache OpenOffice, which has struggled to sustain itself in recent years, the initial disclosure occurred on May 4th, and with any luck, the fix will be finalized before the end of September. Minnesota farming supply cooperative Crystal Valley has suffered a ransomware attack. This is the second farming cooperative that was hit by ransomware operators in a few days. This time, the family of ransomware that infected the systems of the company was not disclosed. The farming cooperative offers its services to farmers in the states of Minnesota and Iowa. Minnesota reported that the cooperative provides services to 2,500 farmers and livestock producers and has 260 employees. According to the co-op, the attack took place on Sunday in response to the infection. The company shut down IT systems. The cooperative suspended all payments using Visa, MasterCard, and Discover credit cards. On Monday, another farmer cooperative was a victim of a ransomware attack. New cooperative was targeted by Black Matter ransomware gang that is demanding a $5.9 million ransom. Earlier this month, the FBI released a private industry notification to warn of ransomware attacks targeting the food and agriculture sector, disrupting its operations, causing financial loss, and negatively impacting the overall food supply chain. Small farms, large producers, processors, and manufacturers, and markets and restaurants are particularly exposed to ransomware attacks. Security experts from consulting firm Grimm have discovered a vulnerability in small offices or home offices, also known as SOHO, Netgear routers that could be exploited by a remote attacker to execute arbitrary code as root. The flaw tracked as CVE 2021-40847 resides in the source of a third-party component included in the firmware of many Netgear devices. This code is part of a circle which is used to implement parental control features to these devices. The experts noticed that this code runs as root. For this reason, the exploitation of the flaw could allow executing code as root. The flaw resides in the circle update daemon that is enabled by default, even if users haven't configured their router to use the parental control features. The daemon connects to Circle and Netgear to obtain version information and updates to the circled daemon and its filtering database. Experts noticed that database updates from Netgear are unsigned and downloaded via hypertext transfer protocol, allowing the attacker to carry out a man-in-the-middle attack on the device. The experts developed a proof of concept for this issue and successfully tested it against the Netgear R7000. You can find the full list of affected devices on Netgear's website. It is recommended to update to the newest firmware. A vulnerability, CVE 2020-17-530, discovered last year in the Object Graph Navigation Language, or OGNL, evaluation function of Apache Struts version 2.0.02 to 2.5.25 can be exploited by attackers to perform remote code execution. This RCE vulnerability doesn't come packaged with Apache Struts, but is dependent on how the web application is configured. So, a simple Apache version check cannot identify vulnerable systems. Apache Struts 2 is a well-known open-source web application framework for developing Java EE web applications that is widely targeted by hackers. According to CVE 2020-17-530, Struts versions 2.0.02 to 2.2.25 are vulnerable to this exploit. This vulnerability occurs when Apache Struts framework is forced to perform double evaluation of attributes assigned to some tags, attributes such as ID if a developer has configured the application to perform forced OGNL evaluation using syntax. Double evaluation is when an expression string gets evaluated as code, and then, if the result is another string, it gets evaluated as code again. The syntax indicates the content inside it should be treated as an OGNL expression. When a user passes a value let's say 2 times 2, the input is treated as OGNL script and is evaluated, again generating output ID equals 4, resulting in remote code execution. Hence, the user input value ends up getting evaluated twice when the tags attributes are rendered. Attackers can execute system commands by sending the especially crafted HTTP request containing the OGNL payload to the target server, like in the examples provided by the researchers. Criminals are constantly creating variants of popular banking trojans, keeping in mind the same modus operandi, but changing the malware internals and its capabilities, making it a fully undetectable weapon. A recent campaign has been disseminated in Latin America and extended to Europe and Portugal. The campaign has been leveraged by Brazilian criminals gangs who use customized phishing templates to spread the Trojan maxtrilha according to the target country. The malware samples disseminated in Portugal open a legitimate web page from Autoridade Tributária e Aduaneira Finanças. Hey, my Portuguese has got much better since I did the daily. So they were sent to this legitimate web page to lure the victims during the execution of the first stage. After that, the malware creates persistence, disables Internet Explorer security settings to facilitate the download of the second stage from the internet. In short, the second stage checks or creates persistence when executed on the target machine, uses a mechanism of capturing details from open foreground windows matching its name with specific hard-coded strings related to banking companies, launches banking windows over an overlay, and it can deploy new payloads as well as communicate with the command control server in real time. The maxtrilha Trojan was developed in Delphi language. It's an x64 binary, and it can bypass antivirus and EDR systems, at least at the time of the analysis. Key findings from this: maxtrilha has been disseminated via crafted phishing templates targeted by country. The maxtrilha first stage, the loader, opens a legitimate service previously presented on the phishing template to lure victims during its execution. The first stage creates persistence on the infected machine, disables Internet Explorer security settings, and accepts extensions to facilitate the download of the second stage. maxtrilha Trojan second stage checks or creates persistence on the machine. It installs or modifies Windows Trusted Certificates. It checks by opening Windows to perform banking Windows overlay to steal credentials, and it can deploy additional payloads executed via DLL injection technique. The victim's data is encrypted and sent to this command control server geolocated in Russia. Now, I highly recommend you watch the full daily episode with more details specific to this maxtrilha Trojan, because it is important. Researchers from ESET discovered a new cyber espionage group tracked as FamousSparrow that has been targeting hotels worldwide around the world since at least 2019. That didn't make sense. The group also hit higher profile targets such as law firms, governments, and private companies worldwide. According to the experts, the group focuses on cyber espionage operations. You think? Telemetry data revealed that the APT group exploited Microsoft Exchange ProxyLogon vulnerabilities since March 3rd, 2021, only one day after Microsoft released security patches for them. FamousSparrow Group employed a custom backdoor dubbed Sparrow Door in its attacks, along with 2 custom versions of Mimikatz. Experts also found connections between FamousSparrow and the APT groups, such as the Sparkling Goblin and the DRB Control Cyber Espionage Group. The APT group has targeted victims from Europe, France, Lithuania, and the UK, the Middle East, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, the Americas, Brazil, Canada, Guatemala, Asia, Taiwan, and Africa. Once compromised the target network, the group deployed custom tools such as a Mimikatz variant, a small utility to harvest memory contents by dumping the Windows LSAS process, and the loader for the Sparrow Door backdoor. The backdoor supports different malicious actions. Here's the list of the actions. The current process is closed. A child svc host.exe process is spawned with process token information of the process ID specified in the command and control server with argument -d, and then the shellcode is injected into the process. Next up, a directory is created using the name provided by the command and control server. Next up, a file is renamed. Both the file to be renamed and the new name are provided by the command and control server. Next up, a file is deleted as specified in the incoming data from the command and control server. Next up, if the length of the data is 1 and the data matches $, then the length of system info hash along with an array of drive types are sent. If the length of the data is greater than 2 and the first 2 bytes of data match the $, then information about the files in a specified directory is sent, The information included is the following file attributes: the size and the file write time. Write time. Next up, a new thread is created to exfiltrate the content of a specific file. Next up, if the kill switch is activated, the current persistence settings, registry and service, are removed and the indexer.exe file is executed. To restart the dropper. If not, the backdoor loop is restarted. Next up, a new thread is created to write the data to a specified file. Next up, if the kill switch is activated, the persistence settings are removed and all the files used by spawn door. Indexer.exe, k7ui.dll, and mpservice.dll are removed. If not, the backdoor loop is restarted. Next up, and I think finally, if the data matches switch, then the backdoor is restarted with the -d switch. If not, it spawns a command.exe shell and sets up named pipes for input and output used by the command and control server to establish an interactive reverse shell. If the data matches exit/r/n or carriage return, then the spawned shell is terminated. Other restarts the backdoor loop. A critical vulnerability tracked as CVE 2021-36260 affects more than 70 Hikvision camera and NVR models and can allow attackers to take over the devices. The vulnerability is an unauthenticated remote code execution, or ICE vulnerability, in Hikvision IP camera or NVR firmware. It was discovered by a security researcher that goes online with the moniker Watchful IP. The majority of the recent camera product ranges of Hikvision cameras are susceptible to a critical remote unauthenticated code execution vulnerability, even with the latest firmware as of the 21st of June 2021, wrote the expert. Upon compromising the IP camera, an attacker can also use the hacked device to access internal networks, posing a risk to the infrastructure that use the devices. The researcher pointed out that the exploitation of the issue doesn't require user interaction. The attacker only needs access to HTTP or HTTPS server ports, typically 80 or 443. The expert pointed out that every firmware developed since 2016 has been tested and found to be vulnerable. Now that is very good research. According to Hikvision, the vulnerability is due to insufficient input validation and can be exploited by sending specially crafted messages to vulnerable devices. The vulnerability was reported to the vendor in June. The company released firmware updates on September 19th. VMware warns of critical bug in default vCenter server installs. vCenter server is a server management solution that helps IT admins manage virtualization hosts and virtual machines in enterprise environments with or via a single console. This vulnerability can be used by anyone who can reach vCenter server over the network to gain access regardless of the configuration settings of vCenter server, said Bob Planker's technical marketing architect at VMware. In this era of ransomware, it is safest to assume that an attacker is already inside your network somewhere, on a desktop and perhaps even in control of a user account, which is why they strongly recommend declaring an emergency change and patching as soon as possible. The security flaw tracked is CVE 2021-22005, and with a CVSS score of CVSS 3.1 or version 3.1 severity rating of 9.8 out of 10, can be exploited by attackers to execute commands and software on unpatched vCenter server deployments by uploading a specially crafted file. Researchers from industrial cybersecurity firm Clarity have discovered 11 vulnerabilities in widely used network management protocols from Nagios. Nagios 11 provides monitoring of all mission-critical infrastructure components, including application services, operating systems, network protocols, system metrics, and network infrastructure. It's used by thousands of organizations worldwide. The vulnerabilities could lead to a server-side request forgery, or spoofing, local privilege escalation, remote code execution, and information disclosure. The vulnerabilities impact Nagios 11, 11 Switch Wizard, 11 Docker Wizard, and 11 WatchGuard. Below, I'll list the complete list of flaws discovered by the experts. You ready? CVE 2021-3753, Nagios 11 Docker Wizard before version 1.1.3 is vulnerable to server-side request forgery due to improper sanitization in table population PHP. CVE 2021-37352, an open redirect vulnerability exists in Nagios 11 before version 5.8.5 that could lead to spoofing. To exploit the vulnerability, an attacker could send a link that has a specially crafted URL and convince the user to click the link. CVE 2021-37351, Nagios 11 before version 5.8.5 again is vulnerable to insecure permissions and allows unauthenticated users to access guarded pages through a crafted HTTP request to the server. CVE 2021-37350, Nagios 11, before version 5.8.5, is vulnerable to SQL injection vulnerabilities in the bulk modifications tool due to improper input sanitization. CVE 2021-37349, Nagios 11, before version 5.8.5, is vulnerable to local privilege escalation because cleaner.php does not sanitize input read from the database. CVE 2021-37348, Nagios 11, before version 5.8.5, is vulnerable to local file inclusion through improper limitation of a path name in index.php. CVE 2021-37347, Nagios 11, before version 5.8.5, is vulnerable to local privilege escalation because getProfile.sh does not validate the directory name it receives as an argument. CVE 2021-37346, WatchGuard Wizard, before version 1.4.8, is vulnerable to the remote code execution through improper neutralization of special elements used in the operating system command or OS command injection. CVE 2021-37345, number 11, before version, Nagios 11 before version 5.8.5 is vulnerable to local privilege escalation because xi-sys.config is being imported from the /var directory for some scripts with elevated privilege or permissions. CVE 2021-37344, Switch Wizard before version 2.5.7 is vulnerable to remote code execution through improper neutralization of special elements used in an operating system or OS command injection. CVE 2021-37343, a path traversal vulnerability exists in Nagios 11 below version 5.8.5 auto discovery component and could lead to post-authentication RCE under the security context of the user running Nagios. The vendor released patches for each of the impacted products in August. Cisco Talos researchers reported that the Russia-linked Turla APT group recently used a new backdoor dubbed Tiny Turla in a series of attacks against the US, Germany, and Afghanistan. The threat actors are using the backdoor since at least 2020. The attackers against entities in Afghanistan took place prior to the Taliban's recent takeover of the government in the country and the withdrawal of all military forces of the United States and its allies. Threat actors targeted the previous Afghan government, Talos speculates. The previously undetected backdoor is likely used by the nation-state actor as a second-chance backdoor in case the primary Turla malware is removed. The backdoor allows attackers to maintain access to the infected system and could also be used as a second-stage dropper to deliver additional payloads. The Turla app group, aka Snake, aka Ouroboros, aka Waterbug, aka Venomous Bear, aka Krypton, has been active since at least 2004, targeting diplomatic and government organizations and private businesses in the Middle East, Asia, Europe, North and South America, and former Soviet bloc nations. The list of previously known victims is long and also includes the Pentagon, the Swiss defense firm ROAG, U.S. Department of State, European government entities, and the U.S. Central Command. The researchers have yet to discover how Tiny Turla backdoor was installed on the victim system. Threat actors used a .bat file to deliver the backdoor that comes in the form of a service DLL called w64time.dll. The Eclipsium research team has identified a weakness in Microsoft's WPBT capability that can allow an attacker to run malicious code with kernel privileges when a device boots up. WPBT is a feature that allows OEMs to modify the host operating system during boot to include vendor-specific drivers, applications, and content. Compromising this process can enable an attacker to install a rootkit compromising the integrity of the device itself. The issue stems from the fact that while Microsoft requires a WPBT binary to be signed, it will accept an expired or revoked certificate. This means an attacker can sign a malicious binary with any readily available expired certificate. This issue affects all Windows-based devices going back to Windows 8 when WPBT was first introduced. They have successfully demonstrated the attack on modern, secured core PCs that are running the latest boot protections. This weakness can be potentially exploited via multiple vectors like physical address, remote, or supply chain, and by multiple techniques like malicious bootloaders or DMAs. Organizations will need to consider these vectors and employ a layered approach to security to ensure that all available fixes are applied and identify any potential compromises to devices. I highly recommend watching the full episode I did or reading the original news article. The link to the daily is above. Independent security researchers Park Minchin disclosed a zero-day vulnerability in Apple's macOS Finder that can be exploited by attackers to run arbitrary commands on Mac systems running any macOS version. The flaw is due to the way macOS handles inetlock files that causes it to run commands embedded inside. According to the SSD Secure Disclosure Advisory, the commands it runs can be local to the macOS, allowing the execution of arbitrary commands by the user without any prompts. An internet location file is a sort of system bookmark. Upon double-clicking one, an online resource or local files will be opened. Initially, the flaw was silently addressed by Apple, but Minchin noticed that the IT giant only partially addressed the flaw. However, the expert discovered that it is still possible to exploit the flaw using a different protocol from file to file with capital letters to execute the embedded commands. A vulnerability in the way macOS processes inetlock files causes it to run commands embedded inside. The commands it runs can be local to the macOS, allowing the execution of arbitrary commands by the user without any warning prompts, reads the SSD Secure Disclosure Advisory. Newer versions of macOS from Big Sur have blocked the file prefix with lowercase in the com.apple.generic internet location. However, they did a case matching causing file with a capital F or file with a capital I to bypass the check. Cobalt Strike is a popular red team tool for Windows, which is also heavily used by threat actors. At the time of this writing, there is no official Cobalt Strike version for Linux. However, in August 2021, researchers at Intezer discovered a fully undetected ELF implementation of Cobalt Strike's beacon, which they named Vermilion Strike. The stealthy sample uses Cobalt Strike's command and control protocol when communicating to the command and control server, and has remote access capabilities such as uploading files, running shell commands, and writing to files. The malware is fully undetected in VirusTotal at the time of the writing and was uploaded from Malaysia. Based on telemetry, with collaboration with Intezer partners at McAfee Enterprise ATR, this Linux threat has been active in the wild since August, targeting telecom companies, government agencies, IT companies, financial institutions, and advisory companies around the world. Targeting has been limited in scope, suggesting that this malware is used in specific attacks rather than mass spreading. In case that quick intro did not help you, Cobalt Strike is a paid penetration testing product that allows you to deploy an agent named Beacon on the victim machine. Beacon includes a wealth of functionality to the attacker, including, but not limited to, command execution, key logging, file transfer, SOX proxying, privilege escalation, mimikatz, port scanning, and lateral movement. Beacon is in-memory file and fileless in that it consists of stageless or multi-stage shellcode that once loaded by exploiting a vulnerability or executing a shellcode loader will reflectively load itself into memory of a process without touching the disk. It supports command control and staging over HTTP, HTTPS, DNS, SMB, name pipes, as well as forward and reverse TCP. Beacons can also be daisy-chained. So, there is no official release for Linux, but there is now a Beacon version that is being installed on Linux and used within malicious attacks. Tasks that Beacon can perform are changing working directory, get current working directory, append write to file, upload file to command control server, execute command via popen, get disk partitions, and list files. The malware uses a separate thread to execute the tasks. The tasks are scheduled as jobs via a semaphore to ensure not too many jobs are executed at once. Vermilion Strike has a third way of communicating with the command control server via ICMP ping messages. The malware adds the current PID to the offset 0x4 in the loader, and the encryption payload is sent as data in the ICMP packet. The data size for an ICMP packet is limited to 65,507 bytes, but the malware uses a size limit of 64,000 bytes for the payload. The code for sending and processing ICMP messages exists in the malware, but the code for enabling it via the configuration is not present. It means it's there, but it can't be configured. This suggests that it may be a new feature that hasn't been fully developed yet. Now, Vermilion Strike is not the only Linux port of Cobalt Strike's Beacon. Another example is the open source project Geekin, a Go-based implementation. Vermilion Strike may not be the last Linux implementation of Beacon either, so be aware of your landscape, check your Red Hat code-based servers, and check your current infrastructure monitoring processes to see what changes you need to make to catch this on any servers you have. A flaw in a widely used Internet of Things infrastructure code left more than 100 million devices across 10,000 enterprises vulnerable to attacks. Researchers at Gardara used their technology to find a zero-day vulnerability in NanoMQ, an open-source platform for EMQ or from EMQ that monitors IoT devices in real time. Then it acts as a message broker to deliver alerts that atypical activity has been detected. EMQ's products are used to monitor the health of patients leaving the hospital, to detect fires, monitoring car systems, in smartwatches, in smart city applications, and more. Gardara used its technology to detect multiple issues that caused EMQ's NanoMQ product to crash during testing. The company said in a press statement, "The existence of these vulnerabilities means that any NanoMQ reliant system could be brought down completely." This could potentially put millions of lives and significant property at risk, according to the firm. The technology within NanoMQ is used for collecting real-time data from common devices, including smartwatches, car sensors, and fire-detecting sensors. Message brokers are used to monitor health parameters via sensors for patients leaving hospitals or motion detection sensors to prevent theft. The software developer has issued fixes. Users of devices that incorporate NanoMQ should check their vendors for an update to device firmware. This disclosure comes amid a spike in the number of attacks in IoT devices, including remote controls, Bluetooth devices, home security systems, and more. Kaspersky released a report earlier this month that showed a more than 100% jump in cyber attacks on IoT devices during the first half of 2021, with a staggering 1.5 billion attacks launched so far this year. 3.8 billion Clubhouse and Facebook user records allegedly scraped and merged, put for sale online. A user on a popular hacker forum is selling a database that purportedly contains 3.8 billion user records. The database was allegedly compiled by combining 3.8 billion phone numbers from a previously scraped Clubhouse secret database with users' Facebook profiles. Compilation appears to include names, phone numbers, and other data. According to the post, the database also contains profiles of users who don't have Clubhouse accounts, whose phone numbers might have been acquired by threat actors due to the company's past insistence that users share their full contact lists with Clubhouse to use the social media platform. The poster claims that the database contains 3.8 billion user records that include names, phone numbers, Clubhouse ranks, and Facebook profile links. Tanglebot, new advanced SMS malware targets mobile users across US and Canada with COVID-19 lures. A clever and complicated new SMS malware attack has been discovered in the United States and Canada. This malware, coined Tanglebot, can directly obtain personal information, control device interaction with apps and overlay screens, and steal account information from financial activities initiated on the device. Following in the footsteps of the Flubot SMS Android malware that has proven to be an ongoing threat in Europe and the UK, Tanglebot attempts to trick mobile users into downloading malicious software by sending COVID-19 warning notifications. Should a user fall victim and click on the link in the message, a website appears notifying the user that the Adobe Flash Player on the device is out of date and must be updated. If the user clicks on the subsequent dialog boxes, Tanglebot malware is installed on the Android device. Tanglebot's then granted privileges to access and control many device functions, including contacts, SMS and phone capabilities, call logs, internet camera and microphone, and GPS. The attacker can now do the following. They can make and block phone calls. They can send, obtain, and process text messages. They can record the camera, screen, and microphone audio or stream them directly to the attacker. They can place overlay screens on the device covering legitimate apps and screens. They can implement other device observation capabilities. Some of these features sound very close to what Pegasus could do for iOS, but this here is for Android. We move on to other security news. CISA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Security Agency are warning of increased number of Conti ransomware attacks against U.S. organizations. The advisory urges organizations to take supplemental measures to increase their level of security. According to the three U.S. agencies, Conti ransomware operators already conducted over 400 attacks against U.S. and international organizations. Conti ransomware operators run a private ransomware as a service. The malware appeared in the threat landscape at the end of December 2019 and was distributed through TrickBot infections. Experts speculate the operators are members of a Russia-based cybercrime group known as Wizard Spider. The advisory published by the U.S. agencies provides the following mitigations: use multi-factor authentication, implement network segmentation and filter traffic, scan for vulnerabilities and keep software updated, remove unnecessary applications and apply controls, implement endpoint and detection response tools, limit access to resources over the network, especially by restricting RDP, secure user accounts, use the ransomware response checklist in case of infection. European Union has formally accused Russia of meddling in the elections and political systems of several EU states. EU High Representative said that Russia-linked threat actors were behind a recent operation tracked as Ghostwriter. The officials pointed out that these interferences are unacceptable because they threaten the integrity and security of the targeted states and pose risk to the EU democracies. In early August, security experts from FireEye uncovered a disinformation campaign aimed at discrediting NATO by spreading fake news content on compromised news websites. According to FireEye, the campaign tracked as Ghostwriter has been ongoing since at least March 2017 and is aligned with Russian security interests. Unlike other disinformation campaigns, Ghostwriter doesn't spread through social networks. Instead, threat actors behind this campaign abused compromised content management systems of news websites or spoofed email accounts to disseminate fake news. Revil ransomware devs add a backdoor to cheat affiliates. Cybercriminals are slowly realizing that the Revil ransomware operators have been hijacking ransomware negotiations to cut affiliates out of payments. By using a cryptographic scheme that allowed them to decrypt any systems locked by Revil ransomware, the operators left their partners out of the deal and stole the entire ransom. Conversations about this practice started a while ago on underground forums and posts from collaborators of the gang, and have been confirmed recently by security researchers and by malware developers. Yelesi Boguslavsky, head of research at Advanced Intel, told Bleeping Computer that since at least 2020, various actors on underground forums claimed that the ransomware-as-a-service operators were taking over negotiations with victims in secret chats, unbeknownst to affiliates. The rumor became more frequent after the sudden shutdown of DarkSide ransomware and Abaddon's exit by releasing the decryption keys for the victims. Recently, these claims got more substance as an underground malware reverse engineer provided evidence of Revil's double-dipping practices. They talk of a crypto backdoor in the Revil samples that ransomware service operators gave affiliates to deploy in victim networks. Fabien Wassar, ransomware slayer par excellence and chief technology officer at MCSoft, in early July provided a clear explanation for how Revil's cryptographic scheme worked. GanCrab's successors uses in their malware 4 sets of public-private keys responsible for the encryption and decryption tasks. An operator master pair that has the public part hard-coded in all Revil samples, a campaign pair whose public part is stored in the configuration file of the malware as a PK value, a system-specific pair generated upon encrypting the machine with the private part encrypted using both the public master and campaign keys, and a key pair generated for each encrypted file. The system private key is essential to unlocking a machine because it is the only one required to decrypt individual files. Recovering it is possible with either the master private key, available only to Revil operators, or the campaign key that affiliates have. Wosar notes that the master private key is Revil's insurance against rogue affiliates, allowing them to decrypt any victim. This is also what Bitdefender used for their Revil decryptor tool, and likely what helped Kaseya victims recover files for free. Reverse engineer and advanced intelligence CEO Vitaly Kremez told Bleeping Computer that the latest Revil samples, which emerged where the gang restarted operations, no longer have the master key that enabled the decryption of any system locked with Revil ransomware. With that, I say thanks again for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe if you haven't already, and smash the bell if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.